For the demo, we are building a simple application called CodeMash Quotes that will allow people to submit a quote that they hear at the conference, and then it will also list all the quotes that have been submitted. So we're making a simple web app and an iOS app, and then we're also going to deploy some business logic to the server with what Parse calls Cloud Code. So we're using Parse.com as our backend. We do have a starter project here that I built. It's just very simple HTML, all static content. We have our bacon ipsum here that's just typed right into the HTML. And we have this form that pops up here, and this is just a form that is hooked up to nothing. If you submit it, it just does the default action of reloading the page. It's not hooked up to anything. So let's get started here. We are going to go to parse.com, and since I'm already logged in, we're going to hit this app button here. And that's going to take me to the dashboard where I can create a new app with this button here. So I'll click this, and all it needs to know is a name. That's all you have to do to get up and running. We're going to call this CodeMash Quotes. And now we have our own little nook in Parse.com's cloud, and we have all of our keys here that identify our app, and a nice little graph showing our daily number of API requests, which is obviously flatlined at 0 right now since we just created the app. All right, so we're going to start with the web portion. Let's go to Quick Start. And since we're starting with the web, we're going to choose JavaScript as our platform. They do have a starter project for you. You can click New Project to download that. But since we have a starting point, we are going to choose Existing Project. And we'll select our app here as CodeMash Quotes. Notice that the keys change. Those update dynamically based on the app that you are working on. So anytime you see this blue box in the documentation, it's specific to your app. There's only really two things that you got to do. The first is to include the SDK from Parse.com, and that's hosted at their CDN. So we're just going to copy this, and down at the bottom of our HTML file, where our scripts are, I'm just going to copy that right here. And then underneath that, we have to initialize it. This is our application ID and our JavaScript key. This identifies us to Parse.com. So we're going to copy that and paste it over here. It will have to live inside script tags. We'll just paste that in there, and then anytime after this, we are able to interact with Parse. So this initializes us, and we will be working in app.js for the rest of the time. So let's take a look at our application and see what we need to do now. We have this feed here where we're going to be getting the quotes from Parse and displaying them out. But it makes more sense to start with adding the quote and hooking up this form, because if we start with this, the database will be empty and there won't be anything to show. So we're going to take this form here that has two text fields, and we're going to grab the values of these and save them to Parse. So let's go back over here, and we will pull up side by side our app.js and our index.html. This JavaScript over here is given to us by Foundation when we start. We're just going to ignore it. And then I have one function already set up here, close modal. This is going to make that pop-up go away. So let's start by creating a function called saveQuote. And this is going to be called when we're ready to save our quote. Let's also take a look at document.ready. And here we're going to listen for that form to be submitted. So we see over here, this is our add quote dialog. The form has a nice ID of new quote. So we are going to grab that with a jQuery selector. And when it's submitted, we are going to do a couple things. First, this event, which is passed through to us, we're going to call e.preventDefault. This is going to stop the page from refreshing like we saw a second ago of the default behavior of a form. And then next we're just going to call saveQuote. So let's look at actually filling in this function here. There's a couple things that you need to do. What we're going to need to do is create a PF object that is the data model for Parse.com. It's what we're going to store all our key value pairs inside. We also need to tell it what class it's going to be a part of. So let's start by creating an instance of the class here. We're going to start by calling it a quote, and this is going to extend parse.object, and we're going to pass in a string quote. So what this is doing is it's saying that this represents the class, and we'll see this in our data browser, called quote. And we don't have to set up anything on parse.com ahead of time. If it doesn't recognize this, it will create it on the fly for us. So let's actually create an instance of this class. We'll call it little q quote, and we're going to call new quote. So now this little q quote is what we're actually going to store our data in. And this right here tells Parse where the data needs to be stored. So on this little q quote, well, let's get back to that in a second here. Let's first create some variables to hold the values of these text fields. We're just going to use jQuery to grab the quote text. And .val will give us the value of that. And let's call attribution and do the same thing. All right, we see the class, or the IDs here, attribution and quote text, and we're getting the value of those. Okay, so now let's actually stick those in the little q quote object. So we're going to call quote.set, and then it's just key value, right? So we haven't set these before. They need to stay consistent, but the first time you have some flexibility, because like the class, if Parse doesn't recognize it, it's just going to create it on the fly. So let's call quote text, the key be quote text, and then we're going to pass in the actual variable that has the value. And let's do it again for the attribution. Let's call this key by, and then we will pass in attribution. Okay, so this quote object has two key value pairs set on it. That is enough. That's all we have to save. So now let's actually save it to Parse. So it's real simple to do that. We're just going to call quote.save. And then inside here, you can actually pass it an object with key value pairs, but we're not doing that now since we set it explicitly up there. So we're going to say there's nothing else we want to save. And then we're going to get one of two callbacks. We're going to get a success or an error. If we get an error, it's going to pass back two things. It's going to pass back the object that we tried to save and then an error message. So if we get that, let's just log out the error.message. So error has a property called message, which is just plain text reason why it failed. We'll just log that out to the console. If we save it successfully, let's log out a message that just says saved. And then let's also close that modal since we don't need it anymore. The form is done being used. Okay, so let's take a look at what we did here. We created a new class the first time, and every time after that it's just going to tell Parse what class to look at. We created a new instance of this quote class, and then we stuffed these two variables into it with our key and value pairs. Then we called save, which is actually going to hit Parse's servers and save this object, and we get one of two callbacks. If the save was successful, we get this. If it wasn't, we get this. So let's go back over to our project, and I'm going to refresh this. And we're also going to pull up our console here so we can see the log messages. And let's try saving a quote. So we're going to pull up the add quote thing. This will be a test quote by Will, and we'll submit it. And we see the modal went away, and we got logged out here saved. So it looks like it was successful. Let's go back to parse.com here and check out our data browser. This is a visual representation of all the data that we save here. So I'm going to choose CodeMash Quotes as my app. And then we're going to go to Data Browser tab here. And inside here, we should see that it created the class quote for us automatically. It did right here. And inside this class, we have one object. We see by is the string will, and quote text is test quote. We also get a few other things here. We get a unique identifier, an object ID, and two dates. One for the date it was created and the last time it was updated. That's great. Okay, so now let's go back to our demo here. Now we need to focus on getting these things back out of Parse. So we want to get all the quotes and display them one by one in this feed style template here. Let's go back to our HTML and see how this is set up. Make this a little bit bigger here. We're going to go back up right here. So I have this div that has an ID of quote list, and inside we have this little block which represents a single quote. So what we want to do is we want to turn this into a template that we can reuse and stick dynamic values in there. So we're going to use Handlebars for that. Handlebars is a HTML templating little JavaScript program that does HTML templating really well. So we're going to create a template out of this. I'm going to cut this out of the HTML here, And we're going to just empty that, take out the white space. And then down here at the bottom, we're going to stick this in script tags. So it's going to be script type is text/x handlebars template. And we'll give it an ID so it's easy to grab, and it'll be single quote template. We'll close out our script tags, and then we will paste in that HTML. I'll get my indentations set here. Okay, and now what we're going to want to do is, this is the quote text here. Let's take that out and replace it with a variable. We're going to name our variable the same as we did our key, which is quote text, and then the person's the attribution. That key was just by. So we're going to have handlebars replace these variables, which are in double curly braces, that's how it knows, with the dynamic values that we grabbed from parse.com. So of course, to be able to use handlebars, we're going to have to include it. So we're going to go to handlebarsjs.com, and we'll download it here. And I'm just going to save this into screencast, web, JavaScripts, and it's just going to be handlebars.js. All right, so that is done. Go back here and we see it there, and let's not forget to include that in our project. Okay, so now we have access to handlebars. We have this single quote template set up. Since it's in script tags, it does not get rendered automatically on page load. We see we should have an empty list here because we cut that out, the static HTML of our list, and we now can work with this template. So now we're going to go back to app.js, and we're going to need a new function here. We're going to need get quotes. So let's create that function, get quotes. And inside this, we're going to have to ask Parse for all the quotes. So to do that, we're going to start by, again, telling it what class to look in. So we're going to make var quote with a big Q, and that's going to be parse.object.extend. We're going to pass in that string quote, so it knows what bucket to look in. And now, from this, we're going to create a query. A query is how you get data out of Parse. So var query is equal to new parse.query, and then you pass this the class that you're looking in. So this tells it what bucket to look in, and then query is our object that we can start setting parameters and constraints on. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with this. We're going to keep it really simple. We're going to call query.descending is going to tell us how to order the results that come back to us. We just pass this a key. I'm going to use created@. We saw earlier that this is given to us for free on every object, and the descending is going to basically say, give me the newest ones first. We'll also limit it to 25 results so that this page does not get overwhelming. You can put as many of these constraints as you want on a query. Once we're all set, we're going to call query.find, which is actually going to hit parse.com with this query object, and they're going to send back all the results that match. So we will get one of two callbacks, success, which will have an array of results, or we will get error, which will pass back an error object. And we'll do the same thing as before. We're just going to log this out, error.message. All right, but if we do have a success, what we're going to want to do is we're going to grab this template, fill in the values, and then stick it in the quote list div, right? Okay, so this right here is where we're sticking things. Let's first compile our template with handlebars. So let's make a new variable to hold the template, and then we're going to call handlebars.compile, and then we just pass it a jQuery selector. We'll use a jQuery selector to find this script tag that holds our template. That's why we have an ID, so we can grab it real simply. And then we're going to grab the HTML out of what it finds. All right, so handlebars is going to find this and compile it so it knows where these variables go. And then after that, we're going to want to iterate over the results. So we're going to use jQuery again for that. We're going to get the results, and we're going to use each. So inside this block, this will execute once for every result we get back. Let's start by grabbing E is the element that we are iterating on, and let's store the value of E dot to JSON. We're going to serialize it to JSON and store it in just, we're calling it Q. And then we're going to grab where we're going to append this, which is quote list. We're going to call dot append, and then we're going to pass append this template that we created up here, and to template we're going to pass Q. So this is the JSON serialized object that we are iterating over, and we're passing this to the template, which is then going to fill in these two variables, which are conveniently named the exact same as the keys, and we're appending that to this quote list. So for every one, we're going to add another block in this quote list. Okay, so if the only thing that we have to do here is if this is called more than once, we're going to get a double list or a triple list of quotes. So let's say if there's a success, before we do anything else, let's just find this quote list and empty it out. So we're just going to call HTML and pass it an empty string, and that will empty it out. Also, we never call get quotes anywhere. We're going to need to do that. So let's use that in, or do that in document.ready. So once the page loads, we will get the quotes. Okay, so let's save both of these files, and we're going to go back over here and refresh the page. And we see that once the page loads, it got the quotes. It found my test quote, which is the one we submitted. Let's add one more piece of functionality here and say once this save quote has been successful, let's also refresh this quote list. So that way when we submit a quote, we won't have to refresh to be able to see it. We'll see it right away. So before we close this modal, let's also call get quotes right here. Okay, so let's go back here. We will refresh the page so that last little addition is in here. And let's try adding a quote and seeing if it shows up right away. Another great quote by Will, and we'll submit it. And we see that this is the newest one. It's showing up first because we had that descending by created date in there. And everything seems to be working. So we got it up and running with Parse. We see all the quotes. We can add quotes, and they show up automatically. Awesome. Okay, so let's go back. Actually, let's move on to the iOS version of this app. We have Xcode up here. We're just moving right into it here. We're going to create a new Xcode project. And we're going to use their starter project, master detail application. Click next, and we're going to call it CodeMash quotes. And do CMQ here. And we're going to make this just for iPhone. We're going to use storyboards and ARC. I'm going to save this in my screencast iOS directory. All right, so first I want to show you what we're starting with here. This master detail application does give you a lot of nice functionality to start with. So I'm just going to click run here, and that'll bring up the simulator. Okay, so what we have here is just a basic table view, and we can, the default functionality here is you can add these, and it adds a timestamp here, and you drill down into the detail view. So what we're going to do with this is we are going to list all the quotes here. We're going to list all the authors of the quotes in here, and then you're going to be able to drill down and see the entire quote. Also, we're going to have this plus button actually pop up a modal dialog that lets us input a new quote. So this is our starting point. We're going to be going from here. So there's a few things you have to do when you're starting out with an iOS app. The very first one, which probably won't surprise you, is we have to include the Parse SDK. So I already have it downloaded here. We're just going to drag Parse framework into our frameworks. And we're going to make sure that we have this checked, copy items into destination group folder. So if we go back to parse.com and we go to Quick Start and we choose iOS this time, we'll see that we have two options just like before, new project or existing project. The new project is, will get you up and running a little bit faster, but it doesn't use storyboards by default, and I am going to use storyboards for this demo. So we're going to choose existing project, and we're going to use the base that we just created there. So let's go here to CodeMash quotes. And there's a few things that we have to do first. Unfortunately, this is something that is really nice that it takes care of for you when you choose their starter project, and it adds all these libraries for you. Since we're not using that, I am going to have to do that manually. So bear with me for a second here while we add all these libraries. So you click on your project here, and then you go to Build Phases, Link Binary with Libraries, and this is where we're going to add all these libraries. So Audio Toolbox. All right, once we add those, we're just going to select all of them, and for tidiness, we're just going to drag those right into the frameworks folder and twirl that up so we don't have to look at it. Okay, so now we're done with that. The next thing you have to do is in your app delegate.m, we are going to import parse. And then in our application did finish launching with options, we're going to initialize parse. So we did this in our JavaScript application as well. We also do it in here, and it gives you this nicely filled in with the appropriate keys based on the app that you have selected. So we can just copy and paste this right from here into did finish launching with options. Okay, so now just like the JavaScript, once we include the SDK and initialize parse, we can start working with parse right away. So for this list view, this table view controller, parse.com does actually give you a starting point for this. Let's go check it out in their documentation. They have what's called a PF query table view controller. This is a table view controller that knows how to talk to parse. It knows how to get results and display them in table view cells, and it takes care of a lot of things for you. Unfortunately, like before, I mentioned that they don't use storyboards by default. So I actually improved this a little bit. If we go to user interface here, and then we go to PF query table view controller, they have this template file that you can use. It's a subclass of the table view controller. So if you go here, and then go to forks, you'll see mine up top here. We'll view fork. And then this is actually what we're going to use. This is just a modification of the template they have that uses storyboards. So let's view raw here. And we're going to use this in just a second. So let's go back to our Xcode project. And we'll bring this back. Make this full width. Okay. So in our master view controller, this is the table view controller by default. We're going to import parse, so it knows what we're talking about here. import the headers, and then it's a subclass of table view controller, so we can just take this and replace it with pf query table view controller. So now let's go into our .m file, and this is where we're going to copy over everything after the implementation. So right after here, we're going to take from here all the way to the bottom, and we're going to copy it, and oops, wrong way. I'm going to take from here down, and we're just going to copy over everything here. Okay, so now we have a file that knows how to talk to Parse, and there's just two things that we have to do here. We have to set the class name so it knows what class to look at, and we know this is capital Q quote. And then this text key is what by default is going to show up in the table view cell on the master view controller. So we just replaced this with the key of the string in the PF object that we want to use. And I said we're going to choose to show the authors of the quote and then drill down to see the entire quote. So this is just going to be by. This is our attribution key. And that's all we have to do. Let's go to the detail view controller. This is what's showed when you drill down. And we're going to go into the implementation file here, and we are going to just replace this self.detail item, which is the item that's passed to this controller. And instead of description, we're going to do object for key, and we're just going to pass it quote text. So this is going to say there's already a string filled into here. We saw that before. This is just going to fill that string in with whatever's in quote text. So let's run this and see what happens. So it says loading from Parse. We have two quotes in here, both from Will. We drill down and we see the quote text. Awesome. Okay, so we got this working. Now let's work on adding quotes in here. So to do that, we're going to go to our storyboard here and take a look. If you're not familiar with storyboards, we'll just do a quick run through here. So we have this master detail view controller here, and this is the table view cell that we drill through into here. So we're going to create another one that's a modal pop-up from here, and that's going to display the form where we create the quote. So let's actually do the code first. We're going to add a couple files. It's going to be an Objective-C class, and it's just going to be a UI view controller. And we're going to call this the add quote view controller. Okay, so in our add quote view controller, there's just a couple things we need to do here. First, we are going to set up a couple IB outlets. So one is going to be a UI text field, and that's going to be the little one. We're going to call that the attribution. And then let's make another one for the actual quote text. That's going to be a UI text view, so it could be a little bigger. And we're going to call this quote text. Excellent. And then we're going to need two methods in here. One, we'll just call done. And the other is going to be save. All right. So done is simple. This is just going to be self dismiss view controller. And we're going to say animated yes, and we don't care about the completion, so we will ignore that. Save is going to be a little different. Save is where we need to grab the values. So we're going to have these two text input fields. One's going to be a text view, one's going to be a text field. But we're going to want to grab the values of these and save them to Parse. So similar to the JavaScript, we're going to need to tell it what kind of class we're working with here. So we're going to create a new PF object. Oops. So before we can create a PF object, we need to import the headers so it knows what the heck we're talking about. Now that we've done that, it should know what a PF object is. Great. And we're going to call this quote. And this is going to be PF object, object with class name. And this is where we're going to set it to capital Q quote. All right. So now quote is what we store our data in here, just like before. So it's going to be, we're going to call quote set object. And then this is going to be the value. And then we'll set the key because iOS is backwards like that. So this is going to be self. Let's do the quote text first. Quote text. For key, quote text. Excellent. And we'll do the same thing for the attribution. So quote set object. This will be self attribution. We'll get the text from that, and the key is going to be by. All right. So once we're done with that, we're going to call quote save, and it has a couple different methods here. We're going to do save in background with block. This won't block the main thread, and it will give us a callback when it's done. So if it succeeded, there won't be an error. So we'll say if no error, then we're just going to call done. So that'll be self done. And we're not going to worry about whether it fails right now. Normally you would definitely want to do some error catching, but for simplicity we're not going to worry about it. So this is all we have to do in code. Let's go to storyboards and actually make this magic happen here. Okay, so here is our storyboard. Let's add a new view controller up here. And we're going to tell it what it is here. We're going to set its class to the add quote view controller. And then let's add in a couple elements in here. Let's first start with we'll give it a navigation bar so it can have a title. Zoom in here. Oops. All right, so the title will be add a quote. And then let's give it two buttons here. So we'll make the one on the right be save, and this one will make cancel. Okay, so now let's add the text fields. So there'll be a tiny text field in here. And then we'll have a bigger text view for the actual quote text. And let's just give that a little label here. So we'll give this a placeholder that says bye. Oops, not the placeholder. Placeholder's down here. That'll say bye. And then let's give this just a little background here because it's difficult to see otherwise. The background color, just this really light gray. All right, so now we have all the fields that we care about. Let's go to our controller here and start hooking things up. So we have our attribution. We'll hook that up to this text field. And we have our quote text. We'll hook it up to this text view. We have done, which will trigger on the cancel button. And then we have save, which will trigger on the save button. Now let's hook this up to the other one here, our master view controller. Let's add a bar button item down here. And we'll make this an add button, since we'll be adding a quote. And then we're just going to right-click drag from here to this view controller and make it a modal. All right, so that should be all that we have to do here. Save when it's successful, will dismiss itself, and it'll show back to this list view. So let's just do one more nice little thing, and we'll say when this view is loaded, we want to refresh the cells. So we'll go to our master view controller.m here, and we're just going to find view will appear, and we'll call self load objects. We'll reload this list view. All right, so let's give it a try. Save everything here and run. So let's click add a quote here. It brings up our dialog box. Let's do a quote. I'm in the simulator by iOS simulator. So we're going to call save here. We see it shows up automatically. We can drill through I'm in the simulator. We do this, we can cancel. Everything is good. So another thing to notice is that something you get for free here is a nice pull to refresh. We could also do that to refresh. And now we have our iOS app working. I do see one problem though, and that is there's no validation here. So these could be empty, and we could save it anyway, and we would have an empty cell here. That's not really great. So let's think of a way to fix that without having to write client-side code, right? So if we want to validate that these things are not empty, we could write some validation on every client application we have. We could write it for iOS, we could write it for JavaScript, but the right place to do this is really in the cloud on the servers before it's saved. So Parse does give us a way to do that, and that's what we're looking at next. It's called Cloud Code, and we're going to write some right here. So they have just a tiny terminal utility that you can use here. So I have my terminal, and I'm in the cloud directory here, and I'm just going to do parse new, and then I'm going to give it the project name. We're just going to call it Cloud Code. And it's going to ask me to log in from the terminal here. So I'm going to give it my email, and then my password. And it's going to see that I have 3 apps, and I'm going to say we want to do this for CodeMash quotes, so we're going to enter 1. And now we're all set up. You see we have a new directory in here for Cloud Code. We have a config file that has some of our keys, and then in Cloud we have main.js, and this is where we're actually going to be working. All right, so what we want to do is so you can actually do functions in here and have functions call from the cloud, but what we're going to do is parse.cloud.beforesave. We're going to give it this class of quote. So this is going to be called before any quote object is saved. And that's exactly what we want to do. So if we want to change something with validation, we don't have to update every one of our client applications. We can do it from one central location. And also this can be updated without having to wait for an iOS review process or anything like that that might slow you down. So let's get some validation in here. We'll call response.success if we want it to be allowed to be saved, or response.error if we don't. So let's start by grabbing the variables that we need here. This is just JavaScript, by the way. This is running on the cloud, but it's the same JavaScript syntax as we used before. The object that we're going to be saving, or that is trying to be saved, is in request.object. So let's grab that with var. We'll call it quote text, and this is going to be request.object. And we're going to use our getters and setters here to safely get this. So we'll call get, and then we'll pass it the string, which is quote text. We'll do the same for the attribution. Request.object.getBy. All right, so now we have these 2 values that we're trying to save. Let's check. Let's say if quote text dot length, and since this is truthy, If it evaluates to 0, it'll be false, which means it's empty. But if it is good, let's call response.success. Otherwise, response.error, and we can pass it in an error message. Okay. So we don't want the quote text to be blank, but an attribution could actually be blank. So let's check for that too. So let's say if the quote text exists, which is this, instead of calling response.success, let's check for something else, and let's see if the attribution length. All right. So if both of these are filled in, no mess, no fuss, we're just going to call response.success. But if not, let's actually set this attribution to anonymous. So we're going to say request.object.set, and we're going to grab it with the key by, and we're going to pass it a string anonymous. So this is actually going to take what is trying to be saved, and it's going to overwrite it. It's going to get request.object, which is the object they're trying to save, and it's going to set for the key by this string, and it's going to overwrite whatever was in there. Once that's done, then we can call response.success. All right. So now, to deploy this, it's very simple. We just go right back, we save this, go back to our terminal, and then we call parse. Oh, first we actually have to go into our directory, cloud code. Once we're in here, now we can do parse deploy. This is going to upload it to the cloud. It's going to get everything up and running. And it says new release is named v1. This just increments every time you do it. And now let's go back to this. Okay, so I have not recompiled. I have not rerun. This is the exact same thing. Let's try to add something with no quote text. And we get an error. Error. What is a quote without text? Well, let's hit cancel. Let's go back to the wedges. Let's make this empty, empty. What is a quote without text? Awesome. So let's see what happens if we do have a quote, but no attribution. Now it's saved, and it's automatically put with anonymous. All right, so we saw how easy it is to create an app with Parse using Parse as the backend. We got a demo up and running very quickly, a web app, an iOS app, and we also have some business logic deployed to the server side, and we can update this at any time without having to update the code in our code in our client applications. So I hope you enjoyed the demo. I definitely enjoy working with Parse. It's great for rapid prototyping. If you have any questions about this demo, the screencast, anything else, hit me up on Twitter at Will Dages, W-I-L-L-D-A-G-E-S. Thank you very much for watching.